Welcome to episode 5 of the Life in Norway show. Is Norway really the happiest place on earth? It's questions like this that I hope to answer as I interview fellow foreigners who live and work right here in Norway. Today I'm joined for the first time by a fellow Brit. Wil Lee-Wright lives here in Trondheim and works as a freelance photographer. He's also one of the founders and driving force behind The List, Trondheim's English language magazine. I first got to know Wil when he kicked around the idea for such a magazine. 3 years later, The List is a thriving publication with a dedicated team of staff and volunteer writers. Today we talk about the growth of the magazine, as well as what it's like to live here in the heart of Norway, in Trondheim. Just before we dive into the interview, Wil would like to make an apology to his dear wife for accidentally getting the name of her hometown wrong during the interview. He's offered to take her out for a slap-up meal at one of the best restaurants in Røvik by way of apology. And now, on with the show. I'd like to welcome Wil Lee-Wright to the Life in Norway show. Wil, welcome.
Hi.
Now, you're a freelance photographer and the co-founder and editor-in-chief of The List, Trondheim's English language print magazine. But first, what brought you to Norway in the first place?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question to answer on a recording, because usually when people ask me, I just simply look at them and raise my eyebrows. And more often than not, I get the correct answer from them. And that's because I'm what the Norwegians call a kjærlighetsreisende, a traveller for love. Now, this doesn't mean the same as travelling to certain parts of Southeast Asia for love. I met my wife in the UK, fell in love, and eventually made the decision to move over here to better ourselves or to have a new adventure. There are many people in my shoes, I think, lots of different Brits and people from other nationalities who have moved over here in search of a better life because of their loved one. The difference is I'm still with her, though.
They do say that people come for the love and stay for the money, or come for the money and stay for the love.
I'm staying for both at the moment.
Fair enough. So you've chosen Trondheim. Is that because your partner is from Trondheim originally?
No, she comes from Nord-Trøndelag, which is the northern municipality above Trondheim. This county is quite large because it's Norwegian sizes. And it's a good 5 hours away, the town that she's from, a little place called Røros, which is the next stop up on the Hurtigrute, actually. But you'd have to take an overnight trip to get up there. That was never really an option for us to move there, having lived in London and other big cities. So we chose the nearest, let's call it Norwegian metropolis, in order to continue our careers and be within touching distance of her family. She also has some family here in Trondheim. And I mean, Trondheim's a fantastic city. It's got a lot going for it. It's beautiful, great access to nature and the rest of Norway as well. So it was the obvious choice if we were going to move out to Norway. And in fact, I'd never been to Oslo, despite having been with her for something like, I should get this right now, 12, 13, 14 years.
I'll be checking that out later.
Something in that ballpark. But I'd never actually been to Oslo before I moved here about 8 years ago. And even after I'd moved here, it wasn't until I was offered some freelance work in Oslo that I had the need to go to the capital. This city had it all, and it still kind of serves my needs in that respect.
So how would you describe Trondheim for somebody who's never been to Norway? In particular, I'm thinking of a tourist who knows a fair bit about Oslo. They know a fair bit about Bergen because these are the destinations that people see on glossy magazines and on TV shows. How does Trondheim compare?
Well, I run the risk of beating down Oslo or Bergen here, but that's only because I've been brought up around these Nord-Tronders and they call the people from Trondheim and Trondelag Tronders, and we have a kind of biased opinion because of that. But I would call Trondheim more like the heart of Norway. It's in the middle. It's where the big part of the country starts to bottleneck into the thinnest guitar neck strip that stretches up from here. And to be in town, to be surrounded by the wooden houses and the old look of the city is very authentic. I often compare it to a city that's been built on The Sims, because it's like a microcosm of a bigger city. You've got mountains surrounding you on all sides. You've got the widest fjord in Norway with what they call the Fosen Alps across the other side, and that means the mountain ridge of the area of Fosen. And you have this kind of river which snakes around a town, encapsulating the centre very neatly. And then you have suburbs around. The suburbs have nothing apart from the odd shopping centre, but they kind of snake up the hillsides rather nicely. And as you become a bit older and less in need of a local bar and crazy nightlife, you tend to sort of migrate up the hillsides in search of better views and bigger properties and so on. So I just think it's a kind of quintessential Norwegian town.
I do have to ask, you don't work for the tourist board, do you? Because you seem to be a bit of a Trondheim fanboy here.
Well, I'm not quite sure how to play this. I've got plenty of negativity to share with you as well. But I thought I'd start off on quite a positive note because, that's what this is all about, isn't it? We're trying to tell people about why we live somewhere. Now, on the flip side, there's something that's particularly British about hating the place you live. But Norwegians don't really get that. We produced a book in Norway, not me personally, but as a British people, we produced a book some Christmases ago, which was called The 100 Worst Towns. I'm bleeping out the expletive here in the title. The 100 Worst Towns in the UK. There were so many complaints about this book, but not because people were annoyed their towns were in it, but because their town wasn't in it. Because as Brits, we love to hate. And by hating something, we show a passion for it and a love for it. But that doesn't really fly here in Norway. If you get critical about where you're living, people kind of take offence. So you have to balance it off with a bit of positivity, especially in the early stages of a conversation.
Sure. So Trondheim then, what makes it such a great place to live, specifically thinking about working here as a foreigner?
Well, this is a multifaceted question as well, really, because it's fantastic in terms of possibly, quite probably, the best working environment you're going to find anywhere in the world, or at least up there. The working days are short, the social security is out of this world, the pay is very high, and all the other elements that come with it, like the attitudes to working life that you'll get with the people you work with, the acceptance of if you become ill or pregnant or you have something else to do or you're late to take the kids into nursery. People are very accepting and they're flexible with the way in which you're going to do your work. And so that's fantastic, that support network. It also means that you can start your own initiatives, which I think we're going to speak a little bit about today. I'm really grateful to that opportunity. I've done things here which I probably never would have attempted in living in London or the UK. It comes with its own problems, perhaps. Like, it's a slower pace of work. Sometimes that's frustrating, especially if you're self-employed. You have a one-man business and you're trying to get things done. Try doing work here after 12 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Forget about it. It's crazy. All Norwegians are out the door. Rush hour here is 3:30 every single day. They have what's called summer working hours. Now, bearing in mind the standard working hours in Norway are 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Let's just repeat that. 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You're finished by 4 p.m. here. But in the summer, the big industries like the banks and so on have summer working hours, which allow their staff to go home at 3:30 or 3 o'clock, because then they get to enjoy the limited sunshine here in Norway a little bit more.
So for all the Americans listening, I just want to highlight this. 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and a 3:30 finish in the summer is absolutely typical for not just life here in Trondheim, but life here in Norway. We've had a few shows just recently about this kind of thing, about the working culture in Norway. And also one about raising a child here in Norway. I don't know if you heard that show, the interview with Audrey Campwell.
I did.
She spoke about she was gushing about the benefits of raising a child in Norway. And you've done a similar thing with 2 children of your own over the last few years. Would you agree with everything Audrey said? What were the pros and cons of raising a family here?
I wholeheartedly agree. And here we go again. I'm trying to look for some sort of negatives, as is my will. But to be honest, it's just incredible. Like, we have state subsidised nursery, which we call Barnehage. And like she said, it's not really equatable to anything you'll find in the UK or the US. It's so comprehensive what they offer. And the pricing for Barnehage here in Norway for a month is equivalent to what you get for a week in London. So we're on higher salaries, but we're getting a way cheaper, a subsidised service. Now, so I won't repeat all the sort of positive aspects that she highlighted. I just say that I agree with that. You can go back and listen to that. But there's some extra background to that, which I find fascinating. A lot of this I've just made up, like in my own sort of mind and the way that I see Norway and assess it. But there's been some research in the past few years which says that the female workforce in Norway is equally important to the economy, like brings in the same amount of money, near enough exactly, as the entire oil sector. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a fudged statistic because there's a big crossover there. Many of those women in work will be working in the oil sector. But what's happened by providing childcare so that both parents can work is that the female workforce becomes empowered again and becomes equally important to employers. And that's backed up also by this maternity-paternity leave, which allows the man equal, if not more, rights to paternity leave. So I'm an employer now. I have employees for a small business. And if you're taking on people who are of childbearing age, whether they're male or female, mid-20s to mid-30s or whatever, you look at both of them as being a potential risk for losing them for 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 months. That is the potential for both of them. So you take that out of the equation. You don't even look at either of them as being a male or a female and saying, and it would be quite a big loss. Like if I've got a staff of 3, to lose someone for nearly a year is a third of your workforce. So this has been incredible. The way that Norway has attempted to I think they tried to even the balance in more as a creating better papas, better dads, like having that kind of interaction with your children. It was also about increasing the population. But I think that this almost unintended consequence that you've got more equal workforce has been a sort of added benefit to the whole situation. And we're definitely reaping the rewards.
Sure thing. Well, if anyone is interested in hearing a little bit more about the benefits of raising a family here in Norway, you can go and listen to episode 3 of the Life in Norway show, which is at lifeinnorway.net/episode 3. Will, you spoke about some of the challenges of working as a self-employed individual or a freelancer here. And although you are a freelance photographer, you also, as you said, run a small business, a publishing company, the List Media, who publish Trondheim's first and I believe only English language magazine. Why start an English language magazine in a relatively small town? I mean, Trondheim's less than 200,000 people, in an era when digital is growing.
Well, you know a little bit about the background of this because I first came to you with this idea many years ago.
You sure did.
And we bounced some ideas around. And it was meant to be a personal project in the first instance anyway, so I wouldn't say that we looked at Trondheim as being the perfect hotbed for this sort of thing. Although latterly I've come to appreciate the fact that because it is this microcosm of a bigger city, it's the perfect testbed for things like this. And there's a lot of research about how Trondheim can be a great launch pad for other concepts, technology and so on, which can be tested in a controlled environment. There's no real big cities right next door to Trondheim either. So you've got this kind of captive marketplace. But forget all that. That's nothing to do with really why we started. I've been living here for a couple of years, working as a freelance photographer. I'm a trained journalist from the UK. I've got a massive passion for print. And if people ask me what I missed from home, I used to say the Sunday papers. Like I made friends with air hostesses just to see if I could get them to bring the Sunday papers back over on their leg over. But it was just becoming expensive and not really working out. It's not the same reading it online, and I could talk about that till the cows come home. But basically, there was nothing in print here, despite the fact that so much of business and daily life is conducted in English. I mean, there's nothing in English in print here. So despite the fact that so much of daily life here is conducted in English, whether it's radio, the products you buy, TV, sports commentary, for example. If you watch the punditry, they'll switch seamlessly from Norwegian to English because of having English ex-footballers and so on the show, but no subtitles and no warning that that's coming. But the Norwegian mind is so sort of quick to switch between these two languages because English is so widely used. But despite that, there was absolutely nothing in print. There's nothing, like, apart from tourist information and some welcome information for university. So I just saw it as a gap in the market, not necessarily a business opportunity, but just something which could be fun to explore. Now, that wasn't really enough to just say there's nothing in print in English. There had to be a sort of rationale as well, like an identity to the product. And the other thing that I thought that was lacking for this city was a really comprehensive listing service, something which enabled people like myself, newcomers to town, be it Norwegian or English or any other nationality, to fully integrate, to really experience what's going on here. You say it's a small town, but I think it really punches above its weight in terms of what you can get here. Now, back when I moved here some 8 years ago, it was still kind of off the trail in terms of like the big tours, the Bruce Springsteen tours and stuff like that. But in recent years, even those tours have added Trondheim dates as they've found bigger and bigger venues to host these things. But it's more of a case of things come around once in a blue moon. If you miss it once, you've got a long wait to get it here again. Whereas in London, they're probably playing the night after or in a city nearby within easy reaching distance. So I've seen incredible stuff here, from Patti Smith playing in the Archbishop's Yard to Bruce Springsteen playing up at the Grønnesund ski centre.
So I've got a copy of the list here, and it is a beautiful publication. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying, that not only the magazine but the organisation has got a lot more professional over the last couple of years as you got more experienced. You've certainly been able to go out and get more advertisers, more contributors, more professional writers coming on board. But what have the successes and some of the challenges been in building this, what is a really interesting product?
Well, that's the thing, you see. So I spoke about it being a personal project when we set out. And very soon, all of these sort of invested stakeholders came out of the woodwork, almost like uninvited. So I didn't realise how much impact a product like this could have. So we had people coming from the business community who were saying that they had skilled international workers, like who'd been perhaps trained here, earning big bucks, but they were not being integrated into the community because of a lack of culture. And perhaps they had a partner back home who was also from their homeland who was not feeling integrated. And as a result, they were putting in their stint. They were having their kids and enjoying the barnehage the years, getting the social security money, getting the good maternity, paternity leave pay and experience, and then taking it away, leaving, going home in search of those warm cultural experiences that they felt that they were lacking here. So the culture was a kind of conduit to keeping good, skilled labourers here in Trondheim. So they came to us early days, and they asked us to sort of expand what we were doing and helped us out with a little bit of money in the early days and things like that. And also the student body here. Trondheim has the biggest international student body in Norway. So we have more international students here than in Oslo, in fact. It's a huge thing. It's a massive university. It makes up a huge part of the whole town's population. And they're all newcomers, by and large, whether they're Norwegian or English. And that was my point early on. Norwegians are so competent in English that we're over 50% readers pretty much from day one. Norwegians love reading about themselves anyway, but also the language isn't a hindrance to finding out what's going on. So imagine if you're a young student coming from somewhere else in Norway, you want to find out some good, positive information about what you can do, different restaurants, bars, cafes, and that's what the magazine did. And to answer the question in terms of how it professionalised, it was more of a needs be. Like we found that just in order to curate all this content, we had to professionalise very quickly, and so it kind of led us rather than us leading it.
So this has been a really interesting journey. I think it's fair to say it's not common to see a print magazine last beyond a couple issues. But
Do you
you're
think?
now, in this day and age, certainly, and you're now on, I mean, how many issues have you put out of the list?
We are about to publish our 19th issue and celebrate our third birthday at the
So
same
3 years of a print magazine that was only started in 2015,
time. 2014.
2014. My maths is not so good today. Um, have you overcome any challenges in getting here? This can't have been an easy ride.
Well, I launched the magazine with three other co-founders, and we all have other jobs. Like I said, this is a kind of passion project, something that we really wanted for Trondheim. Yeah, maybe we're fanboys of Trondheim, like you said. And the biggest challenge has just been keeping it going. I remember that first issue that we created, and me and my colleague Andy, who at that time he's one of the co-founders, and he laid out all of the magazine single-handedly, and the rest of us pretty much created all the content single-handedly. And we stayed up 2 nights in a row without sleep. I don't think I've ever done that. Even when I was a student and partying, I don't think I could do 2 nights in a row. By the third morning, I was dropping the kids off at Barnahage, the then one kid, and they looked at me like I was drink driving, which I probably was in a way. I was so bleary-eyed. And it's just been a really big challenge to keep up the production and keep up the quality and grow with the expectation. We went from a stapled product to a glued limfess, we call it in Norwegian, that kind of a square back, ridge back product. And now we're kind of a slave to that because people expect that quality. And so we have to find a revenue to create a higher quality product time in, time out. And it doesn't end there anyway, as you know. We create other products. We have a technology and innovation and startup magazine called the Tech List, and that comes out once or twice a year. We create private products for other customers. We're basically rolling against the digital wave. We're like a bit of a retro flashback, and people have a need and a love and a passion for print products, things that they can hold. So the challenge has been growing, and of course the economy, like keeping the money rolling and keeping our personal and other professional lives in balance. Not easy when you've got two kids to chuck into the mix.
I can only imagine. So for listeners who are not in Trondheim, you can take a look at the website, thelist.no, and I believe you can read the magazine digitally, is that right?
If you go to thelist.no, there's a direct link to a PDF version of the whole magazine.
Great stuff. Okay, now, Will, as the editor-in-chief, co-founder of this magazine, which is widely known throughout Trondheim and throughout the Trøndelag region, really, you're seen as somewhat of an authority on life in Trondheim. And now, as the boss of a magazine that runs listings on events and reviews restaurants and so on, I'm sure you have plenty to say about what's on in Trondheim, where the best places to go are, and I'm going to be grilling you on that after the break. This episode of the Life in Norway show is supported by listeners just like you. If you're enjoying these interviews, please consider supporting the show from just $2 a month. That's less than the price of a simple black coffee here in Norway. Not only will your support guarantee the future of the show, supporters also get access to exclusive Q&A podcasts, where you can ask any question about Norway and I'll do my very best to answer it. You'll also get to ask questions of our future podcast guests and get free or discounted ebooks. To support Life in Norway from just $2 a month, visit patreon.com/Life in Norway. That's patreon.com/Life in Norway. And now back to the show. I'd like to welcome back to the Life in Norway show Wil Lee-Wright. He's a freelance photographer and co-founder and editor-in-chief of The List magazine, and he's living right here in Trondheim, a big fan of the city. Will, tell us about some of the events, festivals and so on that go on in Trondheim through the year.
Well, like I said, it's a city which punches above its weight in terms of its size and what it attracts here. There's a few really well-known things when it comes to sort of cultural life, like the Stereo Festival. That's stereo with a P in front of it, but if you're in the know, you don't pronounce it.
I've heard a lot of people say postereo.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit pretentious as well. But, oh, do I pronounce the P of pretentious? I'm not sure. It's a little bit pretentious. But there's loads of other festivals as well. They all seem to be packed into the same months.
Yeah, absolutely.
End of July and all through August. You've got this Ålesfestdagene, which is a kind of a religious festival, but attracts lots of big name artists and has markets and events and speeches going on. You have the food festival and the Bryggeri Festival, which is the brewers festival, and that's become enormous, attracting over 200,000 visitors over 3 days every summer. And then during the winter months, you've got more sporadic events on the cultural calendar. Trondheim Calling has really established itself. That's a festival for mostly local bands and so on, which happens beginning of February most years. And I just look forward to all the sort of other more classic stuff like the Christmas markets and traditional things like that. But I should also mention that the conferences and more like the events which go hand in hand with the university and the development happening here in Trondheim, they're really, really impactful and quite serious as well. Technoport, Trondheim Developer Conference, Next Media Conference. These are big tech-heavy conferences which attract people from all over the world, both to speak and to attend. And I guess I should also tip my hat to NTNU for attracting Starmus here this year. Huge festival, which is co-founded by Brian May and Stephen Hawking, I think. And that was a really big deal for Trondheim, and we'd love to see that back here again next year.
Sure, and NTNU, for those that don't know, is Trondheim's university. It's the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and they certainly do punch above their weight for a university in mid-Norway, as evidenced by bringing Starmus to the city. But before we move on to some specific recommendations for people visiting Trondheim, you did talk a lot in the first half of the show about the positives of being in Trondheim and life in Norway in general. There must be some downsides to living in Trondheim, otherwise there would be millions of people knocking on the doors. So, care to share any of those?
Oh, well, should we just roll out the cliches like the weather and the darkness?
The weather is pretty bad at this time of year.
I'm not entirely in agreement about this. And there's a phrase in Norway which is... there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. It rhymes in Norwegian. Now, I don't really agree with this. I think there's such a thing as both, surely.
There is absolutely such a thing as bad weather in Norway.
And bad clothes.
And bad clothing, yes.
They're not mutually exclusive. This phrase doesn't make any sense. But they have all these phrases here, like there's no such thing as... there's no party without moustache. Again, it rhymes in Norwegian.
Okay, so... trying to avoid being too stereotypical here, we are two Brits talking about the weather, but I do want to labour this point. October, November, they are horrible times to be in Trondheim.
Well, the days shorten. Now, if you go from we're quite far up in Norway here, so if you go from a long day with practically no night to a short day with only a few hours of sunlight in the middle of the day, that means that every single day is noticeably longer or shorter, depending where you're on the year. In the UK, you might say, oh, I feel like the days are drawing in here. But here they actually, one day to another, it's about a 7.5 minute shift.
Sure.
That's actually noticeable, like depending on whether it's light when you're leaving the door or not. But I love all that. That's part of the adventure. The first year I was here, it was I remember it being minus 7.5 in the first week of October. And then it was just this deep white winter, like the snow set in and the roads are frozen the whole year. I find all that part of the adventure. The challenges, the things which are the negatives about town for me are much more cultural, like how challenging it can be to become integrated into society here, to find new friends of your own interests and age group, and to get used to the sort of cultural shift from where you come from. Like, we would take our kids to the pub in the UK, but here it would be so frowned upon to take your kids out for a lunchtime pint on a Sunday. And I find that's kind of a big step for me to get used to changing the way that I socialise. But then again, I thought about this a little bit earlier today, and of course, what's your point of reference? When I was in the UK, I didn't have kids. I was younger. I was living a different way. So I think you come to a stage of life when you start to reel things in a little bit. You stay at home a little bit more, and so these things you should take these negatives with a pinch of salt, because it could just be the bitter ramblings of a mid-30-something man who's reminiscing over his youth.
Sure thing. I mean, I think you've sold Trondheim to most listeners. So let's return to what to do when you're actually here in Trondheim. How about some restaurants? You're a fan of eating out. I know you've taken some really interesting photos for the list in Trondheim restaurants. What would your top 2 or 3 recommendations be for where to eat in Trondheim?
I've got advertisers, David, to think about here. So I'm going to try and be balanced.
Try and be independent of the advertisers.
That's the question. Well, again, I love eating out, but I could start with a negative here, actually, because one of the things that we really struggle with is finding good takeaway food in Norway. Now, I actually think food's incredibly well priced here. I mean, the cost of living and food generally is quite high, but you can buy extremely high quality food here for prices you wouldn't be able to get in other cities. But just to get a Chinese takeaway or something like that you would eat on a Friday evening with your family, it's going to cost you 50 quid to feed a family. And no takeaway should be costing you that much money. So I really miss that kind of affordable entry point for good quality food. Although I heard there's a great Ethiopian restaurant which is opened in town. It's called something like Beeb or something. You'll have to put it in the comments of this.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Look it up. I've not eaten there yet though. But there's also a few other places I've not eaten yet, which I'm really looking forward to checking out. There's this chef called René Fagerhey, who was the 2016 top chef on a TV2, local TV, a national TV station's version of MasterChef. And she's opened a restaurant called Bula Bistro in Backlander area of Trondheim. I'm really looking forward to checking that out. It's quite near another favourite of mine, which I'd urge all visitors to Trondheim to check out if they wanted something a bit special, which is called Folkoffe. He's a great chef and creates good, authentic Norwegian food, but with a twist.
That's absolutely one of my favourites as well.
Me too. I mean, if you take Folkoffe as an example, you would be paying as much as 900 kroner for a 5-course meal. Plus drinks per person. But this is like the best restaurant in town, or one of the best restaurants in town. If you compare that to another big city, for food of that quality, I think you get good value at the top end.
Yeah, and that's about 110, 115 US dollars.
Right. Sounds expensive, but things cost money in Norway. But the quality of the food has just changed beyond recognition, even in the time that we've been here. The attention to detail when it comes to local food, what they call short-travelled food, and the kind of food they're producing in a local region is just fantastic. I've worked a lot with a local organisation called Oi Tronders Mat og Drikke, and they're the people behind the food festival. And they work tirelessly to promote locally produced food. And I've had the opportunity to travel to the regions where they create this stuff, and the quality is so high. The problem is when you have to import ingredients from abroad, and then you're paying high taxation because we're outside the EU and because of Norway's particular tax laws. But I digress. In terms of food, there are a couple of places which I really like, but I'd also like to encourage your listeners to get outside of Trondheim when they're here and experience places like Den Guldne Omvei, which translates as the Golden Detour, the Golden Road, so just north of Trondheim, which is just a small detour off the main E6 road going north, which is just stacked full of local producers creating wonderful breads, cheeses, pastries. They have breweries creating their own beers, and Aquavit, the local spirit. That's just fantastic. So real taste.
This is something that you would probably need a car really to fully appreciate. So for those that are just visiting Trondheim for the day, perhaps they're calling into port on a cruise ship or even on the Hurtigruten, what would you recommend are the 2 or 3 must-see things that are easy to access in central Trondheim?
Oh, really put me on the spot. Depends on who you really are and what you're interested in. And actually, I'm gonna go against a little bit what you're saying. This idea that people haven't got cars and therefore they can't get out of town. I think there's too much focus on this idea that you come to Trondheim and you've got to follow the same walking path around town, see the cathedral, see the fortress, see the old bridge, which is just really an old bridge. I mean, these are great, and if you want to do this stuff, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do so. But the beauty of Trondheim is that it's small, and is that the nature is accessible. So it's more than possible to get on a bike and cycle up the steep hill to Bymarka, or get on a bus and do the same within 10 minutes. That's the kind of one of the national park areas just above town. You can take a boat over to Munkholmen and see the town from the fjord. You can cycle along Laderstein, which is a bit more accessible for people who are not interested in mountaineering in their one day here. And even Den Golden Omvei that we spoke about, the Golden Detour, it's about an hour on a train. There's a train stop there, and the local tourist agency will help you with bikes and ways of going around. I just want to encourage people to get out of the city as well. When you travel to a place, it's about experiencing it the way the locals do. Now, if you're going to come to Trondheim and just eat tapas and try and drink outdoor beers, then you're going to be disappointed because you're trying to force an idea of a holiday onto a place which doesn't really accommodate that. It's expensive, it's not in their culture. But if you come and live the way that Tronders do, which is to get out and enjoy nature and eat in the nature, take some sandwiches or whatever, you'll get such a better experience from it than you would otherwise.
That is really, really great advice. I'm sure a lot of people will take that to heart and be planning their trips to Trøndelag right now. But for those people who are new to Trondheim or considering moving here, what are some recommendations? What would make life or the transition into Trondheim life easier for them?
Wow. Again, it's all about trying to do what the locals do. Ask people about what they get up to in their spare time. Norwegians aren't very forthcoming, with what to do or how to do it. Like, we wrote an article for the list right back in the beginning about how to butter your skis, which means how to put the wax on and so on. This sort of knowledge they grow up with. They have a very homogenous culture here, and so things are kind of expected of each other to know. So you've gone to school, you've actually learned to ski at school,
Sure.
Or nursery in fact. And so if you don't have that knowledge when you arrive here, you're actually falling behind straight away, figuratively and literally. And so you need to be a bit more outgoing. You need to ask people about where to go and labour the point, that you're new and you haven't skied before. So can you please recommend somewhere that's flat if I'm going to do cross-country skiing and not going up and down? So you're either skiing backwards by accident or plummeting down a hill and crashing into some locals and really announcing your arrival on the scene that way. There's also, because it is winter now coming, the snow really comes in December, late December. But there's a couple of local downhill ski centres, which most of us newcomers to Norway are probably a little bit more accustomed to. And they go and do skiing under the lights in the evenings. Now, if you go to the Alps, quite often you don't get the opportunity to do night skiing because everyone's drunk by 4:00, and so the slopes close. But here it's the other way around. There's no alcohol served in these little local slopes. And you take your family, they're really well lit, really well maintained, small, very affordable evening out. And that sort of thing can be a real gateway into Norwegian culture.
Okay, great stuff, Will. Now, before we close up, from one Brit to another, is there anything you miss about life in Britain? You've already mentioned taking your kids to the pub for a lazy Sunday afternoon. So that's cheating. We can't have that again. Anything else? Good football, perhaps?
Well, I've bought my ticket pack to... I'm trying to translate back from Norwegian now. That's maybe I'm missing good language. I'm somewhere in the middle of both of these languages these days. So billetpakke is the ticket pack to the 3 home games of the Europa League that Rosenborg are playing in. And I bought that, and I love going to the football here. I've worked at the football stadium as a cameraman for many years, not in recent seasons, but I'm enjoying going there as a regular punter. I do miss some of the Premier League, like the British football, but Norwegians are very passionate about football, so I couldn't really put that in there. And you've already taken the pub off the table, so what am I going to say?
Marmite, maybe.
Oh, we've got a stockpile at home. If you're lacking any Marmite, just come round. My kids love it. I do miss, actually, that's a good point, actually. I really miss the variety of food. Now, this must sound crazy to people who don't live in the UK, but the quality of food in the UK is fantastic. You go to the supermarkets and you can buy stuff from anywhere in the world. Now, when I was visiting my parents last month, I got dropped at the bus station to get a bus back alone to the airport, and there's a Waitrose there. Now, Waitrose is a slightly more upmarket supermarket in the UK, but I couldn't believe how cheap it was. Oh my God, like the variety and how I filled a whole suitcase and checked it in just full of things that I could buy on the shelves there. Here, the choice is a bit limiting, and I do miss that because I love to cook and I love to like experience flavors and stuff from around the world. And one of the only negatives of Norway is that it's a bit limiting, and so although it sounds crazy, I miss the food of the UK.
I think that's fair game. I mean, whenever I visit the UK and whenever my partner goes back to Mexico, both of us take an empty suitcase with us and we bring things back with us. That's just the reality of life here. But I think it's also fair to say that you do adjust to the lack of variety here. You find other ways of eating differently. Now, we're going to wrap up with standard 3 questions that I ask every guest here on Now, we're going to wrap up with the same 3 questions that I ask every guest here on the Life in Norway show. Quick answers, please, Will.
Oh, no.
What's the best thing about living in Norway?
It's quick answers. You put me on the spot. Okay, I think the best thing about living in Norway is the safety in terms of social security, but also that it's a very safe place to live. Crime is next to non-existent here.
What do you find most challenging about living in Norway?
The safety. It's a very safe place to live. Well, I think it's very challenging because there's not much cutting edge. I spoke about this homogenous culture, and I'm not bothered about the weather and about all the differences. That's what as intrepid explorers of the world, people who go to be expats and live elsewhere. That's what we're after. But because it's so homogenized and it's so safe, it lacks a bit of that sort of like anarchic culture, which drives so much of the music and art that we love from back home, or just generally. Here seems a little bit more tranquil. I'd like a little bit more edge at times.
Fair enough. So that's the same answer for the first 2 questions.
Yeah, I think so.
Final question. What's your favourite place in Norway, whether that's a town or a really specific spot that only you know?
Well, you know what? I'm a bit awful at travelling Norway. I'm putting Lofoten as my top place to visit because I've not yet been there. But as somebody who quite enjoys the mountains and loves surfing, this is top of my world list, not just Norway. But because I haven't been there yet, I can't use that one. So I'm going to say the Atlantic Road, Atlantshavnsvei, which is just near the Molde area, about 3 hours out of town. And it's really beautiful, and it's got all the positives that I love from where my wife's family are from as well, up in Nord-Trøndelag. The idea of like islands and sea, and I love the ocean. And if you're going to live in a country with as much coast as Norway, you've got to really embrace that. And you can go surfing there, and you can do fishing. And I think it's a really beautiful part of Norway, which I can get to quite easily from Trondheim.
Yeah, it also makes a great weekend trip from Trondheim. I've done that many times. Will, thank you so much for joining us. Where can listeners learn a bit more about you and the list?
Well, you can check out the list's website or like us on Facebook, the list Trondheim. Or you can come visit Trondheim and pick up a copy of the magazine yourself.
Where's it available?
We're in 300 spots all over Trondheim and outside of Trondheim. It's for free, I should point out. It's comes out every other month, and you can pick it up at the airport, the train station, most cafes and bars. You can pick it up where our office is based at Habitat, which is a co-working space called Digs on all of Tryggvasonsgata. You can pick it up at the university and pretty much anywhere else that you're going to find magazines and leaflets. We're there.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.